Hey everyone, welcome to another top 10 list. This week's top 10 list, it's only going to be a top 5, but as far as I know, these might be the only 5 in the particular list. What is this week's list? Well, you probably read the title already. This is going to be the top 5 notes featuring people who were still alive. Okay, since I want to say 1869, a law was passed saying that no living person would be allowed on our currency. But prior to that, we had a few. So I would like to thank my friend Dan from Polar Currency who inspired this list and where I've got a lot of the information from. So hopefully I do it justice and don't butcher too many of these. All right, number 5 on the list. We are going with this particular note. This is just a replica. You can see here it's a two-sided replica, or two single-sided sheets. This note is really expensive. I hate using replicas, but it's the best I can come up with in a pinch for this particular one rather than just showing you a book. This is the 1862 $10 legal tender, and it features Abraham Lincoln. Now, in 1862, Lincoln was president and still very much alive, and he was pictured on the $10 legal tender. Take a look at the back of this particular one. This note is a legal tender. You can see it right here, legal tender. Now, this particular note, like I said, was one of the first notes ever produced. 1862 was the first series. There were the demand notes of 1861. But as far as actual legal tender currency, that would be this series here. And of course, with Lincoln being the president, they thought it'd be appropriate to put him on there. So that is number 5 on the list. Number 4. During that same time period, you were talking about the Civil War. And one of the big problems with the Civil War was that people were not spending change, they were hoarding change. So the Secretary of the Treasury and the Treasurer got together with Lincoln and decided, let's come up with postal currency or fractional currency, essentially paper change. And they did the first series of those, and they featured George Washington on a lot of them. The first series pictured what looked like stamps. Then they redid the second series. Most of those had George Washington. When it came around to the third series, well, they were running out of ideas. So the Secretary of the Treasury decided that he was going to put himself on the 25-cent note. And this is the Secretary of the Treasury, Fessenden, Fessenden. Fessenden was his name. And he decided he was going to put himself on there. And I just want to double check, make sure that I'm saying it right, because I'd hate to get it wrong. Where is it? Here it is. Right there. Bust of William P. Fessenden, Secretary of the Treasury under President Lincoln. So he put himself on there since they had already okayed Lincoln being on the 10, being the Secretary of the Treasury. That's not an unimportant job. So that did give him enough providence to have his photo on the $25 fractional. That one is number 4. Now that was the Secretary of the Treasury. The actual treasurer, you may have heard of him. That would be F.E. Spinner. And he decided that he would go on the 50-cent version of the fractional currencies for the third issue. So here you've got third issue. This particular one's a specimen, so this particular note actually has his signature on it. This one, nothing on the back because it's the specimen. But I thought this was cool. Had to show this particular one. So Spinner, the treasurer, very much alive, very much part of the decision process, put himself on, much like Fessenden put himself on. So you've got the 25-cent with Fessenden, the 50-cent with Spinner. Number 2, that's number 3 on the list. Number 2 on the list, well, both Spinner and Fessenden had to go to the Bureau of Engraving and Printing, or the and talk to the person in charge there and tell them who is supposed to go on the notes. And they wrote down that each of them were going to be on the notes. And they came up with a great idea for who should be on the 5-cent note. That would be Clark, meaning from Lewis and Clark, Meriwether Lewis and William Clark. So they put down Spinner for the 50 cent, Fessenden for the 25 cent, and Clark for the 5 cent. Well, the person they handed all this stuff to happened to be the superintendent of the National Currency Bureau, and his name was Spencer Clark. So Spencer Clark saw that Fessenden wanted to be on a note and that Spinner wanted to be on a note, and they were telling him, Spencer Clark, that the 5-cent note will have Clark on it. So Spencer Clark put Clark on it. He put himself. And he didn't understand what all the gripe was about, because if Spinner was going to be on there and Fessenden was going to be on there, and they said they wanted Clark on there, well, of course they meant him, right? Well, no, they meant Clark as in Lewis and Clark, and Meriwether Lewis and William Clark. But too late. Spencer Clark put himself on there. That caused the huge controversy, and that made it so that no living person was ever going to be allowed again. Even though everybody remembers Spinner because of his signature, nobody seems to remember Fessenden, and I have to keep looking up his name to make sure I'm saying it right. So it was okay for these two, but heaven forbid the actual person in charge of the printing of the notes put himself on there. Anyway, that's number 2. Number 1 this week is an interesting one. This is Salmon P. Chase. He is on the very first $1 bill, $1 legal tender from 1862. And at the time, he was either the treasurer or the secretary of the treasury. I don't remember which. But Salmon P. Chase had a very interesting career in the U.S. government. So obviously here he was alive. After being the treasurer, he then was appointed to the Supreme Court and became Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. And there was a time when the value of paper money was challenged. There was a constitutional decision to be made whether it was legal or not to have paper money. And even though Chase was the treasurer and helped implement the paper money system, as the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, voted against having paper money, even though he was instrumental in coming up with paper money. So that's kind of ironic that the guy who appears on the $1 bill and put together paper money decided once that he was a Supreme Court justice that all of his previous work was useless and should be ignored, basically. So that's the story with the $1 from 1862 featuring Salmon P. Chase. That is number 1 on the list. All right, guys, if you learned anything new, which you may very well have had, because, well, let's face it, there's not a lot of living people, or at least people who were alive, to hold a note with their own name, or not with their name, but with their picture on it. Of course, nowadays, the signature is the important part, because we haven't changed the faces on our notes in forever. We should be doing that pretty quick, I suppose. Anyway, hope you guys learned. If you learned anything new, go ahead and hit that like button. If you like what you see and you want to see more, please subscribe. Love reading all your comments. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again next week.